بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته Inshallah we'll continue from where we left off. Part of the lesson got cut off because my computer shut down for some reason. So I'll just repeat this is the part that may have been missed. I didn't check, but we'll go over this now quickly. In the last lesson, the Shaykh was talking about, if you go to the topic, start of the claim of right, the claim to the right of judging or law making law and making things halal and haram. This was basically what the topic was about. Then towards the end of the lesson, the Shaykh made a comparison. He talked about when Islamic scholars, Muslim scholars, when the ulama, the people of knowledge, when they do their best to come at a judgment based off of the Quran and the Sunnah, and obviously they use the evidence as available to them from the Quran, the Sunnah, etc. And they can't make a mistake. They're only human at the end of the day. The mistake can be made, and as the general ruling goes with regards to that, when a genuine mistake was made, this is the point, a genuine mistake is made, then with regard to that, then the scholar from his ijtihad and effort in trying in deriving a conclusion or a ruling from the Quran and the Sunnah in a certain situation, then if they make a genuine mistake, they get one reward and they are seen as being forgiven because it was a genuine mistake, it wasn't deliberate. And if they make the correct ruling, then they have two rewards. This is what's well known amongst the people of knowledge regarding this issue. Then the Shaykh says that's talking about scholars, right? Scholars and people of knowledge. What about the people who are the complete opposite, where they take the rulings and they follow the other than the Sharia, other than the Islamic law, and they make things halal and they make things haram, which opposes what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and they do it in complete opposition because of whether they're following some democracy or other systems that are man-made and not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what the Shaykh says. So in comparison to that, obviously the latter type of person or group, obviously that's tantamount, that's kufr. Basically, if you remember from the lesson, that leads to kufr if the person believes that is better than the law of Allah. But refer back to the whole lesson to get the full message from the Shaykh on that. Let's carry on now. Go to the next part. The next chapter. So this chapter is where the Shaykh says حكم الانتماء إلى المذاهب الإلحادية والأحزاب الجاهلية. So this chapter is about the ruling on those who associate or ascribe themselves to atheistic groups and ignorant parties. The Shaykh will explain this. He'll break it down what he means by that in more detail, inshallah, as we go through. So the Shaykh starts off. He says, "Al-intima'u ila al-madhahib al-ilhadiyya كالشيوعية والعلمانية والرأسمالية وغيرها من مذاهب الكفر ردة عن دين الإسلام. فإن كان المنتمي إلى تلك المذاهب يدعي الإسلام فهذا من النفاق الأكبر، فإن المنافقين ينتمون إلى الإسلام في الظاهر وهم مع الكفار في الباطن، كما قال تعالى فيهم وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم قالوا إنا معكم إنما نحن مستهزئون. الآية. وقال تعالى الذين يتربصون بكم فإن كان لكم فتح من الله فإن كان لكم فتح من الله قالوا ألم نكن معكم وإن كان للكافرين نصيب قالوا ألم نستحوذ عليكم ونمنعكم من المؤمنين. الآية. So then the Shaykh says, ascribing or associating to groups or parties, the ones that relate to atheism, or these other groups, non-Islamic groups. For example, he says, example, communism, liberalism, capitalism, these kinds of things that, you know, we see in the West, you know, they're out there, they're everywhere, but we see it more in the West. We obviously live, yeah, the ones who do, but even around the world, you see people ascribing to these kinds of ideologies. And the Shaykh says, and other than these ideologies, the Shaykh says that these ideologies and these ways, they are disbelief, and it's whoever follows these, then he apostates from Islam. He's an apostate. And he'll explain. He says, whoever ascribes to these methodologies and claims to be a Muslim, claims Islam, then this person is a hypocrite. It's the greater hypocrisy. As remember a few lessons ago, the Shaykh explained this about hypocrisy. So it's greater hypocrisy. And he says that the hypocrites, they ascribe to Islam, as we know, the hypocrites, they ascribe to Islam in the apparent, and they are with the disbelievers inside them. What's hidden, they are with the disbelievers, but they don't show it apparently. Yeah, that's hypocrisy, as we know. And then the Shaykh says, Allah the Most High said about them, and this is the first of the ayahs that we read from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 14. So if we go to the translation of the meanings of that, we'll see what's being said here. So that's verse 14. Let's go and have a look, inshallah. Verse 14. We all should be familiar with this, inshallah. And when they meet those who believe, they say, we believe. But when they are alone with their shayateen, devils, polytheists, hypocrites, etc., they say, truly we are with you. Verily, we were but mocking. This is what they say. And also then the next ayah is from Surah An-Nisa, verse 141, where it said, let me find this. Okay. Those hypocrites who wait and watch about you, if you gain a victory from Allah, they say, were we not with you? But if the disbelievers gain a success, they say to them, did we not gain mastery over you, and did we not protect you from the believers? So that's the starting of the ayah, first part of the ayah. So this is what the Shaykh brings as evidence of what he said. Then the Shaykh goes on to say, فهؤلاء المنافقون المخادعون لكل منهم وجهان وجه يلقى به المؤمنين ووجه ينقلب به إلى إخوانه من الملحدين وله لسانان أحدهما يقبله بظاهره المسلمون والآخر يترجم عن سره المكنون وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم قالوا إنا معكم إنما نحن مستهزئون. So then the Shaykh says here at the start of this next paragraph that these hypocrites, they are deceivers, and they have two faces. One of their faces points towards the believers, the Muslims, and the other face, it turns towards the to their brothers, the atheists, all of the ones who oppose Islam, the kuffar. And they have two tongues. Likewise, they have two tongues. So meaning that the Shaykh says one of those is where they are on the apparent, they accept Islam and it looks like they're Muslims, and on the other hand, the second one is that they hide what they hide within themselves, as in of disbelief. And then the Shaykh brings part of the ayah back that he said earlier on, which we translated, alhamdulillah, and that shows the way they are, as Allah has told us about them, the hypocrites. Then the Shaykh says, قَدْ أَعْرَضُوا عَنِ الْكِتَابِ وَسُنَّةِ اسْتِهْزَاءً بِأَهْلِهِمَا وَاسْتِحْقَارًا وَأَبَوْا أَنْ يَنْقَادُوا لِحُكْمِ الْوَحْيَيْنِ فَرْحًا بِمَا عِنْدَهُمْ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ الَّذِي لَا يَنْفَعُ الْإِسْتِكْثَارُ مِنْهُ إِلَّا شَرًّا وَاسْتِكْبَارًا فتراهم أبدا بالمتمسكين بصريح الوحي يستهزئون الله يستهزئ بهم ويمدهم في طغيانهم يعمهون الآية. وقد أمر الله بالانتماء إلى المؤمنين يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين الآية. So then the Shaykh continues and he says that these hypocrites, they've turned away from the book and the sunnah. The book, i.e. the book, again, 1 second. It's Ustad Shu'aib who's speaking. Sorry, brothers. Okay. So, basically the Shaykh continues and he mentions here, with regard to these hypocrites, that they turn away from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by way of mocking. So is their way of mocking it and turning away from its people, from the people of the Sunnah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And then and they obviously belittle. So they mock and they belittle the Quran and the Sunnah and its people, and they reject and they also reject the rulings and the law of the two revelations, i.e. the Quran and the Sunnah, of that which is with them, of whatever knowledge that they have, and they think they're benefiting from their own knowledge and their own ideologies, even though they may have lots of information, lots of ideologies, whatever it is, it's only leaves them in evil and arrogance. But anybody who turns away from the guidance of Allah, then obviously it's evil. It leads to evil and it's arrogance. Then the Shaykh continues, he says, فَتَرَاهُمْ أَبَدًا بِالْمُتَمَسِكِينَ. So I said this in Arabic. So then you see them always holding on to this wahi, but this revelation, but they are basically mocking. They're mocking it, as we know about the hypocrites. They mock the deen, as the examples have come from the Quran and the Sunnah. Then the Shaykh brings ayah 15, verse 15 from Surah Al-Baqarah, and if you have a look at that, we'll see what's being said. And the Shaykh brings this as evidence. He says, Allah mocks at them and gives them increase in their wrongdoings to wander blindly. So they mock, but Allah mocks them. And then the Shaykh, he goes on to say, وَقَدْ أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِالْإِنْتِمَاءِ إِلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So Allah has commanded us to associate ourselves with the believers, to be with the believers, to be with the Muslims as one group. And the ayah there is, as we read, is from Surah At-Tawheed, verse 119. And if we go there, we'll see what's being said as well. Surah At-Tawheed, verse 119. O you who believe, be afraid of Allah and be with those who are true in words and deeds. So this is what the Shaykh brings as evidence with regards to what he said here. Then the Shaykh continues, he tells us, he says, وَهَذِهِ الْمَذَاهِبَ الْإِلْحَادِيَّةِ مَذَاهِبٌ مُتَنَاحِرَةٌ لأنها مؤسسة على الباطل فشيوعية تنكر وجود الخالق سبحانه وتعالى وتحارب الأديان السماوية ومن يرضى لعقله أن يعيش بلا عقيدة وينكر البدهيات اليقينية فيكون ملغيا لعقله. والعلمانية تنكر الأديان وتعتمد على الماديات التي لا موجه لا موجه لها ولا غاية لها في هذه الحياة إلا الحياة البهيمية. والرأسمالية همها جمع المال من أي وجه ولا تقيد بحلال ولا حرام ولا عطف ولا شفقة على الفقراء والمساكين. So then I'll just stop there for a sec. Then the Shaykh, he says, and these ideologies, such as, you know, communism, capitalism, liberalism, all these that are out there, and the ones who are from the West will be quite familiar with these types of ideologies, and they're spread throughout the world, unfortunately, but they're there. And the Shaykh says that they lead to argumentation and corruption and these kinds of things. But argumentation because their foundations are based on falsehood. The foundations are based on falsehood. So he gives examples. He says that communism, for example, you know, it disavows or it denies the presence of a creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it wages war against against religion, and specifically the religions that have been revealed, the revealed religions where Allah sent prophets and messengers. And the Shaykh says, as a rhetorical question, he says, who's pleased with their intellect, with, you know, this kind of intellect, or believing this and living a life like this with no belief, with no creed? And, you know, this ideology, communism, as an example, it basically disavows, for example, you know, what's you know, your natural inclination that Allah's put in you, the fitrah. That's and if you think about it carefully, you'll see that it's silly to even believe what the ideology stands for. It doesn't make any sense at all with a sound intellect that hasn't been corrupted. And then he goes on to talk about liberalism. So people who follow this liberalism, where as we know, liberalism also disavows, for example, religions in general, and it relies upon materialistic things within the world, material world, for example. There's no direction in it. There has no direction. It has no purpose in this life, and all it has is living a life like an animal. No purpose, nothing, just there, do what you want, do whatever you want, everything is okay. Leads to chaos and corruption in the land likewise. Then the Shaykh says, he talks about capitalism. So he moves on, he says, and as the third example, capitalism. What, as we're all aware of this one, capitalism's purpose, what is it? He says that it's the main purpose of it is to gather wealth from any way possible, any way. Take the ways and means, doesn't matter whether it is, whether it's good or bad, just go for it. They don't care about whether it's halal or haram, permissible or impermissible, you know, ethical or unethical, was whether it has any mercy or, you know, and care for the poor and destitute. It doesn't matter, as we know, most of us will be aware of this, and what the result is from capitalism and what corruption it causes within the land. So then the Shaykh continues. So this is where we left off. He says, وَقَوَامُ اقْتِصَادِهَا عَلَى الرِّبَى الَّذِي هُوَ مُحَارِبَةٌ لِلَّهِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَالَّذِي هُوَ دَمَارُ الدُّولِ وَالْأَفْرَادِ وامتصاص دماء الشعوب الفقيرة وأي عاقل فضلا عمن فيه ذرة من إيمان يرضى أن يعيش على هذه المذاهب بلا عقل ولا دين ولا غاية صحيحة من حياته يهدف إليها وينادل من أجلها. إنما غزت هذه المذاهب بلاد المسلمين لما غاب عن أكثريتها الدين الصحيح وتربت على الضياء وعاشت على التبعية. So then the Shaykh says that these is based upon, like, a lot of this, especially capitalism, is based on interest and usury, as we know. And as we know from Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah mentions about riba, and that that Allah will wage a war against the one who engages in it. And so we know the crime of that is severe. So then the Shaykh goes on to say that why? Because it leads to destruction it destroys countries, and it destroys countries on that level, and on the lower level it destroys people, families, individuals as well. And it's a cause of and it sucks the blood in a metaphorical sense. It sucks the blood of those who are poorer. The poor people, if they need to take a loan out, somebody who's asking for a loan, for example, as we all know, they need that loan because they don't have the money, but they will pay it back eventually. That's the idea. But if we start charging them interest and extra money on top, are they ever going to pay it back? And we've seen examples on the micro level of this issue for countries that get destroyed when they take these loans out. For example, when they take loans out with the IMF, the World Bank, and then did they ever recover? I can't remember a country recovering from that. In fact, it just got worse. It just get worse over time. And same thing on the individual level. I'm sure we have stories that we can tell about people that we know, maybe even ourselves, maybe at some point affected by something like this. Obviously, as Muslims, we should stay away from interest, and it's haram. But perhaps you may not have known, or whatever the reason might be. But we may have heard stories of people, for example, where they've fallen into these issues, and then they're in more trouble. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of exactly. So there's a lot of problems out there in the world, and we know that Islam has a solution for all of these problems. But as you know, there's a massive war being waged on Islam every day, and it's been going on for a long time. So and the Shaykh mentions this here. He says towards the end of this paragraph that that all these methodologies and these ideologies that he mentioned, they're false ideologies, and he says, unfortunately, they have entered the Muslim lands, and people have basically taken up these things and have weakened their religion and lost their way and started following these. Sadly, this is what the Shaykh has mentioned. He'll expand on that in the next few paragraphs. Then the Shaykh says, وَالْإِنْتِمَاءُ لِلْأَحْزَابِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ والقوميات العنصرية هو الآخر كفر وردة عن دين الإسلام، لأن الإسلام يرفض العصبيات والنعرات الجاهلية. يقول تعالى: يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. الآية. ويقول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: ليس منا من دعا إلى عصبية، وليس منا من قاتل على عصبية، وليس منا من غضب لعصبية. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم: إن الله قد أذهب عنكم عبية الجاهلية وفخرها بالآباء، إنما هو مؤمن تقي أو فاجر شقي. الناس بنو آدم، وآدم خلق من تراب ولا فضل لعربي على أعجمي أو عجمي إلا بالتقوى. So then the Shaykh goes on to mention here, he says that associating with these parties and groups which are of ignorance, and these types of groups, societies, people, and it's related to partisanship, ignorance, and also to an extent as well racism can be put into this category, as Shaykh mentions, that people are sticking to groups, and then he says that, you know, obviously this is disbelief, and it takes you, and it makes one an apostate and makes the person leave the fold of Islam. He says because al-Islam, it rejects this partisanship and this kind of groupism and partisanship that is of ignorance. And then he says, Allah the Most High says, so we read this ayah, let's have a look. It's from Surah Al-Hujurat verse 13. So if we have a look at that now, we'll see what's being said. O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know one another. Verily the most honorable of you with Allah is that believer who has a taqwa, i.e. one of the muttaqun, pious. Verily Allah is all knowing, all aware. So as we can see from here, the Shaykh has brought this ayah, and it tells us that there is no difference between us except our taqwa, our God consciousness, and our, you know, fearing Allah and being aware of Him. And if I can remember correctly, one of the, from the Saleh, the Tabi'een, I believe, Talq ibn al-Habib mentioned taqwa, explained taqwa in a good and clear way. He said that it's basically, I'll put in a nutshell, that basically taqwa is God consciousness, of course, and God fearing God. That's that, but there's more to it. That taqwa is basically you acting upon the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with, and following Allah's commands, right, upon guidance, and doing it to the best of your ability, and also, so that those are the commands. So following Allah's commands, executing those what He's told us to do, we do it upon guidance upon the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. And likewise, on the flip side of that is staying away from all those prohibitions that Allah has told us to stay away from what we know of the Quran on the authentic Sunnah. That's what taqwa is, and that's a good comprehensive meaning, and it shows us that it's on both sides, following the commands of Allah and also staying away from those things that Allah has prohibited us from. And then, as the scholars explain as well about taqwa, that there's two levels. That's the first level. The first level is the Muslim who, so there's two levels to taqwa. The first level is where the Muslim, I'll explain this because the Shaykh hasn't mentioned here, but it's a benefit from other lessons. So taqwa here basically meaning that there's two levels to taqwa. The first level of taqwa is when the person, he or she, they follow the commands of Allah, they execute the commands of Allah, they do what's obligatory and a must upon them to be a Muslim, and they also stay away from all the things that are haram, that are impermissible. So all the prohibitions, they stay away from them. If they do what's obligatory upon them on the minimum level, and they stay away from all the haram, then that's the first level, and that's the first level of taqwa and wilaya, being considered as a friend or a close friend of Allah. The second level is the person who expands upon that and does all kinds of extra optional good deeds. That's the higher level, and that's the better level. But the first level is, it's inshallah easy for all of us to be able to strive for that. It's not hard, but these are important things to remember, inshallah, so we can work towards by the permission of Allah. Then the Shaykh brings a couple of hadith. The first one, in brief, where the Shaykh has brought this as evidence, and Basically, mean he who summons others to a party or groupism or partisanship does not belong to us, is not from us. And he who dies upholding partisanship, this kind of partisanship, does not belong to us. And an important thing to note, whenever you hear is not from us, whenever you hear this in hadith is not from us, this is a major sin. It's a major sin. Laysa minna, not from us, it's a major sin. It doesn't mean that he's not from us completely, that he's a disbeliever, like automatically, no. So this is an important principle to remember, that it's a major sin. And obviously the scholars say that if Allah does not forgive you of a major sin on the Day of Judgment, then you'll have to go to the hellfire. If you die upon Tawheed and as a Muslim, you will be purified in the hellfire, depending on what it was and what you did, what we did, or what the person did. And once they're purified, they will be thrown into paradise. But I don't think any of us would like to be going there anyway. So it's good to know these things, just to make sure. Then the Shaykh brings another hadith as well, with a similar meaning, with regards to this ignorance and pre-Islamic ignorance and just ignorance in general, that it's disliked and it's not from Islam to have this ignorance of being proud about your lineage and all this sort of thing that we see. And this is explained in more detail in a different book called Masail al-Jahiliyyah. It's a different book, but the Shaykh brings it here as well, that with regards to his hadith. Yeah, and that and indeed a believer is a believer who is God-fearing and has taqwa, or is a disobedient, for example. And people are from the people are the children of Adam, and Adam was made from dirt or dust or clay or mud. And the Shaykh, and then towards the end of this hadith, there's no specialness or particularity over an Arab over a non-Arab, except with taqwa. So the similar meaning to the first, same meaning more or less to the first hadith. So as we know, there's no difference between an Arab or a non-Arab, a white person to a black person, etc., except with regard to their piety. That's what counts, with their piety, their taqwa. Then the Shaykh continues, he goes on to say, وهذه الحزبيات تفرق المسلمين والله قد أمر بالاجتماع والتعاون على البر والتقوى ونهى عن التفرق والاختلاف. قال تعالى واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا. So that's from Surah Ali Imran. And the Shaykh says that, he says here that the partisanship, its conclusion, partisanship's effects are that it separates the Muslims. Partisanship, it splits and it splits the Muslims, the ranks of the Muslims, it splits them up into groups and weakens them. And it says that Allah has commanded us with being one group, being one body, and to cooperate upon piety and taqwa, to cooperate upon all that which is good and fear God, and as we mentioned, taqwa. And then the Shaykh says, and Allah has prohibited us from splitting and differing. And then the Shaykh brings the ayah that we just read in Arabic, and if we have a look at the meaning of that, that's from Surah Al Imran verse 103. So let's go and have a look at that, inshallah. So it's the beginning of the ayah. And hold fast all of you together to the rope of Allah, i.e. this Quran, and be not divided among yourselves, and remember Allah's favor on you, for you were enemies one to another, but He joined your hearts together, so that by His grace you became brethren in Islamic faith, and you were on the brink of a pit of fire, and He saved you from it. So that's where the Shaykh has mentioned. And the rope of Allah, the scholars say, generally speaking, obviously this is a translation that I've read from, of the meanings, but the rope of Allah, as the scholars mention, is the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is it. That's the rope of Allah. And as you know, that's clarified by what the Shaykh has mentioned here. Then the Shaykh goes on to say, "Inna Allah subhanahu yurid minna an nakuna hizban wahidan, hum hizbullah al-muflihun. ولكن العالم الإسلامي أصبح بعدما غزته أوروبا سياسيا وثقافيا يخضع لهذه العصبيات الدموية والجنسية والوطنية ويؤمن بها كقضية علمية وحقيقة مقررة وواقع لا مفر منه." So then the Shaykh says here that what happens, or Allah wants us to be one group, one party, one group, the Muslims as being one group, and they are the group that they are the group of Allah that are the successful ones. The Shaykh says, however, he says, but in the Islamic world, what's happened is the affair has changed because, for example, Europe and other continents from the disbelievers have waged a war, a political war, a cultural war against the Muslims. And by way of that, there's many groups, parties, partisanship has come about that have led to all sorts of problems, whether that be nationalistic issues with nationalism and other groups and parties that are far away from the Quran and the Sunnah and the Deen of Islam, and causing corruption and trouble and problems within the Islamic world. And then the Shaykh says, for example, وَيُؤْمِنُ بِهَا كَقَضِيَّةٍ عِلْمِيَّةٍ وَحَقِيقَةٍ مُقَرَّرَةٍ وَوَاقِعٌ لَا مَفَرَّ لَهُ. So then he says here in this last bit, where I've reread that again, that it's got to a point, basically saying it's got to a point where there's no escaping it. That's how widespread it is in the Muslim world, that there's no escaping it. It's just everywhere. It's like a disease. Then he goes on to say, وَأَصْبَحَتْ شعوبه تندفع اندفاعا غربيا إلى إحياء هذه العصبيات التي أماتها الإسلام والتغني بها وإحياء شعائرها والافتخار بعدها الذي تقدم على الإسلام، وهو الذي يلح الإسلام على تسميته بالجاهلية. وقد من الله على المسلمين بالخروج عنها وحثم على شكر هذه النعمة. So then the Shaykh goes on to say that the nations, the people, they got to such a point, we're talking about the Islamic world now, they got to such a point that they are defending to the utmost point in a strange way, and they are bringing about, and they are they are reviving these partisan groups, these ideologies and other things that Islam got rid of, and that Islam came and cleaned out and clarified what is required of a person, a Muslim. And they sing, and they revive their slogans, and they are proud by doing all of this. It says after Islam came and cleaned and fixed all the problems, they've gone back to the old ways, the ignorant Jahiliyyah ways. And as we know in our religion, in Islam, that that these ways, these other ways, and these parties, groups, and all this that's going on in these ideologies, they all are under the banner of ignorance. And as the Shaykh says, and Allah has bestowed upon us and blessed us, us Muslims, with being far away from these types of ideologies through obviously our religion and what's upon us as Muslims to follow from the Quran and the Sunnah and to be thankful for this blessing. Then the Shaykh continues, we're almost done, we've just got another 5 minutes or so, inshallah we'll finish, inshallah 5 to 10 minutes. Then the Shaykh he says, وَالطَّبِيعِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ أن لا يذكر جاهلية التقادم أهدها أو قارب إلا بمقت وكراهية وامتعاض وقشعرار. وهل يذكر السجين المعذب الذي يطلق سراحه أيام الانتقال وتعذيبه وامتحانه إلا وأرد قشعريرة. وهل يذكر البريء من إلة شديدة طويلة أشرف منها على الموت أيام سقمه إلا وانكسف باله وانتقع لونه والواجب. So then I'll stop there for a sec. Then the Shaykh says, and it's natural, it's normal for a believer, it's natural for a believer not to mention the ignorance, or the either times of the ignorance, or what they may have been upon, for example, except though with a condition, except with hate and dislike, and the shock and the disgust, etc. Because the Shaykh brings examples. He says, for example, does a person who was imprisoned and punished, and when he was discharged of this punishment and was released, for example, will he go around mentioning all his hard times, what happened and all that? Was naturally and generally speaking, but naturally would he mention all those hard times, everything that's happened to the people? All it would do would bring back shock and him shivering and goosebumps. So he gives this example, and likewise somebody who he says here, gives another example. He says somebody, for example, who was very ill, and he was, for example, close to death, dying of this illness, whatever, and then he's cured or he gets better, for example. Would the person go around mentioning that just from a general point of view? Would they mention this to remind themselves of that tough time that they went through? Usually that doesn't happen. It just brings some of those examples for us to think and ponder over. Then the Shaykh says, وَالْوَاجِبُ أن يعلم أن هذه الحزبيات عذاب بعث الله على من أعرض عن شرعه وتنكر لدينه كما قال تعالى قل هو القادر على أن يبعث عليكم عذابا من فوقكم أو من تحت أرجلكم أو يلبسكم شيعا ويذيق بعضكم بأس بعض. Surah Al-An'am verse 65. So then the Shaykh says what's obligatory here and a must for us is that we know that these parties, these groups, they are a punishment that Allah has brought about upon the people who have turned away from His law, from what Allah, from the deen of Islam, but the Shara, yani the Sharia, and the ones who disavow and reject, His religion, Al-Islam. As Allah Ta'ala, the Most High, said, and then we read that in Arabic, so let's go to Surah Al-An'am, the translation, verse 65. Say, He has power to send torment on you from above or from under your feet, or to cover you with confusion in party strife, and make you to taste the violence of one another. So that's the part that the Shaykh has mentioned. So that explains to us that, that these groups have come about, then here's the reason, and these are the effects. And then the Shaykh brings a hadith as well of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَلَمْ تَحْكُمْ أَئِمَّتُهُمْ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ بَأْسَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ. So whoever doesn't rule by, whoever's leaders don't rule by the book of Allah, then Allah will bring about infighting and trouble to be caused between the people in that place, wherever it may be, and cause trouble and strife between them. Then the Shaykh goes on to say, إن التعصب للحزبيات بسبب رفض الحق الذي مع الآخرين كحال اليهود الذين قال الله فيهم وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا بما أنزل الله قالوا نؤمن بما أنزل علينا ويكفرون بما وراءه وهو الحق مصدقا لما معهم. Surah Al-Baqarah verse 91. كحال أهل الجاهلية الذين رفضوا الحق الذي جاءهم به الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم تعصبا لما عليه آباؤهم وإذا قيل لهم اتبعوا ما أنزل الله قالوا بل نتبع ما ألفينا عليه آباءنا. Surah Al-Baqarah verse 170 ويريد أصحاب هذه الحزبيات أن يجعلوها بديلة عن الإسلام الذي من الله به على البشرية. So then in this final section, conclude with this inshallah. The Shaykh, he says, he brings the hadith, we already mentioned that, and then he goes on to say, he says that partisanship and these parties, they bring about rejection of the truth. So this partisanship brings about rejection of the truth that may be with other people. For example, the Shaykh gives an example about the Jews, how they rejected the truth. And if we go to the relevant ayah, Surah Al-Baqarah verse 91, and when it is said to them, the Jews, believe in what Allah sent down, they say, we believe in what was sent down to us, and they disbelieve in that which came after it, while it is the truth, confirming what is with them. So that's an example there, when they rejected the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what he came with. This is this partisanship and what it results in. So this is what it results in. Then the Shaykh, he goes on to say, and also like the people of, or the condition of the people of ignorance, they reject the truth of that which the Prophet ﷺ came with. They reject the Prophet ﷺ, for example, sticking to their forefathers and what their families and their ancestors were upon. So this is the other example of just sticking to the ancestors, or our forefathers were upon this, and that's, we're just going to stay upon that, as we know from the many examples that Allah shows us within the Quran and the way of the conditions of the people and how they were. And the ayah that the Shaykh brings is verse 170 from Surah Al-Baqarah again. When it is said to them, follow what Allah sent down, they say, nay, we shall follow what we found our fathers following. So this is what those people of ignorance said and still say today. Same thing. And the Shaykh says that the people of these the leaders and the people of these parties, these partisans, and these people and the leaders and the people who are within these groups and parties, what they want is they want their parties and their ideologies to be to replace Islam that Allah has blessed the people with. They want to replace that with which Allah has set down, and what Allah wants for the people and a blessing for the people, they want to replace it with their own ideologies. And this is one of the other reasons that the Shaykh brings with regards to partisanship. So inshallah we'll stop there. We'll continue after Ramadan. Now we'll take a break and we'll continue after Eid, inshallah. We'll continue and we'll aim to finish this book as we go through it. Barakallahu feekum. And hopefully everyone makes the most of their Ramadan and has a good Ramadan and a blessed Ramadan, and has an Eid, a blessed and happy Eid, inshallah. And we'll reconvene our lessons after Eid with Allah's permission. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.